I have to learn how to do it.
3, 2. Good evening and welcome, everybody. It is Tuesday, November 12, 2019 at 6 p.m., and I'm calling this meeting of the Common Council of the City of Wausau to order. We'll begin tonight's proceedings with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Please press yes to take roll call. We have 9 members present.
Start off tonight with a proclamation. This is to recognize Veterans Day and the contributions given to America by our veterans. Whereas throughout our history, loyal citizens from every corner of America have willingly assumed the duty of military life in conflicts worldwide to ensure the citizens of the United States a life of democracy and freedom. And we salute the members of the armed forces who are confronting our adversaries abroad, and we honor the men and women who left America's shores but did not live to be thanked as veterans. They will always be remembered by our country. And today our veterans inspire new generations of Americans as we work to defeat terrorism and advance peace throughout the world. And in respect for and recognition of the contributions our servicemen and women have made to the cause of peace and freedom worldwide, we celebrate Veterans Day. Now, therefore, be it resolved that I, Robert B. Melke, Mayor of the City of Wausau, do hereby encourage all citizens of the community to participate in patriotic duties by celebrating Veterans Day, which was yesterday, and to recognize the valor and sacrifice of all United States veterans. And it's not to embarrass members, but we do have several veterans here on the council and on staff. I'll first recognize Mr. Dennis Smith, who's a veteran of the United States Marine Corps, who also had service in Vietnam. We'll also recognize Mr. Dave Nutting, United States Army, and also Eric Lindman, the officer in the bunch, who was also a U.S. Army veteran. Thank you all for your service.
And Mayor Melke, too.
Long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. All right, moving on. We do have a lengthy, I always believe in public comment to let folks speak. However, due to time constraints, I say this respectfully. While we do want to hear from everybody, because I know one issue tonight is going to be a little contentious possibly, as well as being very passionate. But if you start hearing people repeat one another, I would ask out of consideration to possibly forego. Otherwise, we'll get started. And this is for the public record. We have 2 different ones, one from Tricia Zunker, and then also one from the National Law Center on Homelessness and Poverty. All of you have copies of this in for your record. And then we will start with Mr. Tom Killian. And if you could please, when you come forward, please limit your comments to 3 minutes. I will be keeping time. And state your name and address for the record, please. Thank you.
Good evening, Tom Killian, 133 East Thomas Street. I am here this evening to urge council members to vote against the proposed ordinance targeting the removal of homeless sleeping in heated stairwells of parking ramps, aka the Wausau Loitering Ordinance. At the very least, this matter should be tabled this evening until the problems which are evident with this troubled measure can be addressed and resolved. Of utmost importance is that there be adequate local resources in place to make sure that those who are unsheltered, who will be impacted by this ordinance, have alternate housing or sleeping arrangements. Currently, some do not. Given the challenges described by some in recent weeks, which relate not only to homelessness, but to the convergence of homelessness and chronic alcoholism, at least one option for a low-barrier wet shelter would be required and should be pursued immediately in a public-private fashion. If the council looks upon this agenda item as time-sensitive, then it should act with urgency in the planning and execution of these alternate housing arrangements for those who would be impacted. Without having those resources and options in place, then however well-intentioned in some regards, this proposed ordinance is inhumane and inappropriate. Therefore, it should be rejected or tabled. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next up, Mr. Alan Scheidel.
Hi, I'm Al Scheidel, live in Wausau, Wisconsin, 166414, County Highway N. I was the owner of the Rainbow Laundry, and there's been a lot of discussion about the homeless people and what's going on. I hear people say, well, it's only just starting to happen, 1, 2 years, 3 years. Well, it's been going on for 10, maybe even 14 years. I lived it. And there's more out there now because the laundromat is no longer there. It was burnt by a homeless person. And I agree with the gentleman that was just up here saying that there is a need, a great need for these people to have a place to go during the day when they're not allowed in the Catholic Charities or Salvation Army. They have their rules, and they're good rules. They want these people to be motivated. And so therefore, they need to leave the premises 8 o'clock in the morning, but when it's 20 below zero, there's no place to go. And where can they go to get warm? We don't want them in our businesses unless they're doing business there. I started a laundromat to run a laundromat, not to babysit the homeless people. There's a lot more issues going to come up about this. I'm not going to say them all tonight. But there are people in this town, Ard Nemrick is one of them. He's trying to put together a deal so that these homeless people can stay somewhere during the day when they are not allowed in these 2 other places to be warm. Part of the problem is there's too many rules and regulations. This building's not good enough. That building's not good enough. We tore down a perfectly good building in Stettin, a school. It was tore down. It was good enough to house our children, send them to school, maybe even take naps. But it's not good enough for the homeless. We need a place like this to keep them off the street and to give them a place to stay warm. But there's also 2 different types. There's the homeless people, and there's the other ones I call bum and scum. Because that's what they are. They don't want to listen. They're alcoholics, drunks, whatever, don't follow the rules, and that's why they're out on the street in the first place. Because Catholic Charities and Salvation Army got their rules. You come in here drunk, you're not going to stay here. You got to go. Same thing with Catholic Charities. What do we do with those guys? That's a whole different problem, a bigger problem. Boot camp, detention center, whatever it may be. But it has to happen. And I think writing a citation to the homeless people, maybe some of it might work on some of these guys, but for the most part, it's going to be a waste of money. You're going to send them to court. You're never going to get paid. And it's just going to be a waste of time. We need to do something different with it. The citation thing's just not going to work. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Next up, please, Ms. Judith Miller.
Judith Miller, 903 Kickbush Street. I would also point out, I am against the idea of a $50 fine for this homeless situation. I would say you are criminalizing homelessness, which I see does not provide a solution to the problem, either short-term or long-term. I would ask you, if they're kicked out of the ramps, where would they go? As many as the gentleman just pointed out, there is nowhere else for them to go. Also, I would ask, if they run up fines, if they have 1, 2, 3, where are they going to get the money to pay that? In the end, they'll wind up in jail. Does that solve the problem? No. I would suggest that we can, as a community, be more imaginative, more creative, and more compassionate in regard to this problem. While it may not be appropriate for people to be parking themselves in the ramp, so to speak, as human beings overnight, we can perhaps partner with Habitat for Humanity, take some of the vacant buildings in town, refurbish them, create apartments. They don't have to be big apartments. I would point you at a program that was successful in Newark, New Jersey, and in Salt Lake City, where the homeless population was reduced by 70%, called Housing First. Research has demonstrated that someone is alcoholic, someone has an addiction problem, someone has whatever kind of problem of that sort, that to get them housing first and then treat the problem is a solution. It's very hard to stay sober when you're back on the street in a tent after you've been at the healthcare center for 3 weeks. Think how desperate you might feel. I would also simply say, if you need to institute some sort of penalty, I would ask, could it not be something more constructive? Perhaps a community service, 10 hours of community service, and this will get you something else, a night stay somewhere, free meals somewhere, some other thing. I also ask if the churches in the community could not be open with some volunteers, and perhaps the Community Foundation, the Green Hack Foundation, could pony up some money for some half-time staff to supervise those volunteers. Again, I say we need to be more creative and more compassionate. Please vote against this. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Terry Killian?
Good evening. My name is Terry Killian. I live at 133 East Thomas Street in Wausau. I can only talk to you about the humane aspect of what's being proposed here. I know before I came to this meeting tonight, I had to go out into my garage and warm up my car because I didn't want to drive here in a cold car. And I thought, oh my God, I'm going to have to leave that meeting and I'm going to have to get into a cold car and go home. But guess what? I have a warm home to go to. I cannot even imagine going to that warm home tonight and sitting there not feeling shame and guilt if I knew I had been responsible to throw even one person out of their warm shelter, wherever that is. So I urge you to vote no.
Thank you. Next up, Mr. Roberto Parteru. Boy, I sure hope I said that right, Roberto. I know we've met.
You did. It's one of those French names, so it's hard. My name is Roberto Parteru. I'm the Executive Director of Catholic Charities. Again, there isn't much I need else to say. Everything has been said. We as Catholic Charities oppose this resolution. We think it doesn't solve the problem. We understand the issue. We understand the concern of the business community and everybody involved. And I think that we need to find a better solution. And there are conversations within the community that we'll have hopefully we will open a day center, we will do something, but we need to give time. The resolution of making a fine for the homeless, they won't be able to afford it, they can't pay it. So it just creates a bigger problem when we try to work with them and we try to help them to overcome. It just creates another burden, another problem for them to overcome, and it won't solve the issue. So I urge you to reconsider.
Thank you, sir. Next up, Ms. Lauren Henkelman.
Thank you. Lauren Henkelman, 155 Ethel Street in Wausau. So I am glad to hear the city and police department talking about wanting to help our homeless population, but this ordinance would be a step in the wrong direction. I've volunteered and worked with many of the individuals that you chronically see downtown. Many of them already have a strained relationship with the police. and I'm really concerned that their ability to fine or remove them at their discretion will have a negative impact in our community. I understand the concerns regarding cleanliness and safety. However, if something illegal is occurring, they can already intervene. The videos of previous meetings made it clear that the intention is to target the homeless people, regardless of various scenarios that have been talked about. The ordinance would escalate an already tense situation rather than work towards a solution. I really hope the council takes this opportunity to address the root cause of poverty and homelessness in our area. As Judith talked about, many cities and states have had success with treating addiction as a public health crisis and adopting a housing first philosophy. Income-based buildings in our area have wait lists. The Section 8 vouchers have extremely long wait lists, and we've seen low-income housing replaced with very unaffordable housing in our area. It has been proven that without a safe place to sleep, individuals have a much harder time securing a job and seeking treatment for addiction. It is a vicious cycle. Please work on a comprehensive, ethical solution to this issue. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Mr. Joel Lewis.
Joel Lewis, 807 Turner Street, Wausau, Wisconsin, 54403. And I just want to thank you for fostering good discussion. I think that's really what we need as a community to move forward, is community discussion on this issue. So I had a neighbor, basically, who was collecting donations because they know of the folks that are banned from the shelters and know about where they're staying and know what some of their needs were. And they connected with us and our family, and then invited some others to come along, I think for safety, but also to kind of, so we could see what was happening. And I was really shocked at the number of beds that I saw under the bridge, especially as we were watching, weather forecasts for some really, really cold weather coming. I was just overwhelmed by the outpouring of support once this started to kind of be publicized a little bit on social media, as far as, people coming out with emergency blankets, hand and toe warmers, that kind of thing. And it really shows the beauty of this community and how we do pull together. And I also want to speak about the Public Health and Safety Committee that voted unanimously. One of the representatives on the council here contacted me and kind of gave me the side before the video had come out. And then I saw the video, and I think, looking at Chief Ben Bliven's statement as well on Wausau Police Department's Facebook page, you realize this is a very complex issue, right? And I also have spoke with some folks who are crisis workers in this situation as well. So you hear stories of people urinating or defecating, not only in the ramps, but in the police cars or at the healthcare center. I mean, there's a lot of problems that are hard to face. And so I can understand, in some ways why you arrived at this decision with your committee. But I really have to join the chorus of voices here that say we don't think that a $50 fine is the way to fix the problem. There's got to be a better solution. I'm hoping that you will at least maybe table this a little longer so we can have some community discussion. And I've also made sure to connect this grassroots effort that happened in my neighborhood with the Housing and Hunger coalition through United Way, the Wisconsin Coalition Against Homelessness, and trying to figure out how we can connect with other organizations as well, and making sure this is, that we're not reinventing the wheel, that we're working with the folks that have already been doing this good work. And so I just want to say I understand it's not an easy decision. I don't hold any ill will towards anybody for the decisions you made, but I hope that you'll consider slowing down and trying to come up with a better solution. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Ms. Sharon Shermer.
Thank you for all taking time out for this meeting and allowing us to talk about this situation. I do not feel the homeless should be kicked out of the parking lot situation and then fining them $50. Where are you going to get the $50 from? These people don't have $50. I had a situation where I took in some homeless behind my old camper, and they were so gracious for that. But then they started doing drugs, and they were selling drugs out of the camper. And I kind of put the kibosh on it. I did call the police, and the police wouldn't do anything. And finally, after a few more times, they fined these people $1,500. Where are they going to get the $1,500? So just kind of poo-pooing these homeless is not a good situation. And not only that, these people are veterans. A lot of these people are veterans, and they deserve the right and the respect to have somebody help them when they can't even help themselves. So I think we may need to do something about the situation of trying to find abandoned houses or whatever, seeing if you can somewhat fix it up, see if they can go in there and stay. Churches. My daughter had a situation where they would allow the homeless in the church, but they would have to have somebody supervised. The city would pay for this supervision person, and but then they cut that out. City couldn't afford it no more. I mean, if they would just pay that $50 for an evening or $100 an evening for these people to stay in churches. A lot of these churches are huge, and I'm sure they can find somewhere they can put these homeless people. So, thank you for your time.
Real quick, Mrs. Shermer, for the record, your address?
Oh, I'm sorry, 608 Park Avenue.
And just to let folks know, many of the churches around here do provide sanctuary.
Okay, thanks.
Next up, Mr. Mark Craig.
Well, good evening. I'm Mark Craig. I'm living at 814 Adams Street. I represent Compass Properties. And as you know, I represent a lot of businesses downtown. A lot of the people that work in the buildings that we're talking about utilize these parking ramps. But as everyone has said tonight, this is a very difficult issue, one that I don't envy any of you making the decision you needed to make. But you know, there are probably more homeless people downtown. I've been working downtown for nearly 25 years now, almost every day downtown. And I think that over the last few years, we've seen homelessness become more pervasive and more bold in some of their actions, because they sleep in our stairwells, they come into the bathrooms, and we have issues. And this ordinance was never about the homelessness. Unfortunately, it came out that way in a committee, but that's not, I was in the original discussions, and that wasn't what the discussion was. It was more about loitering and people feeling safe coming into from their vehicles to work, coming back to the vehicles after work. A lot of the force downtown are women coming to and from, now that it's dark at 5 o'clock at night. We have to also consider their safety and their concerns and making them feel more comfortable, because we have a commerce to run. This is a central business district. And as much as we are compassionate for the homeless and we want them to have those opportunities to sleep and be somewhere else in terms of home, warm places to be, I think we as a community, this issue has brought us all to the table. Joel and the Killians and the gentleman from the Rainbow Laundromat, we're all speaking tonight because we care about people, and it's as much as about the homeless as it is about providing safe places for people to come into from work. You have a parking structure with over 700 stalls, right? We're talking about people sleeping in stairwells. It's about those stairwells. Think about it. It's not so much seeing somebody across a parking structure and feeling uncomfortable. It's about traversing up and down a stairwell, being surprised by someone you're not expecting. I've talked to Eric Lindman about the possibility that we could secure 2 stairwells, that they would have.
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you. Could you?
Dennis,
I got a new phone and
as
I'm
loud
not
as I
quite
can, buddy.
comfortable with it. Trying to turn it off.
But I couldn't have timed that if I tried it, so.
Technology will bite you every time.
Oh, I know. Bless you.
Sorry about that.
That's okay.
And for the record, please turn off your cell phone, so. Okay.
So one of the thoughts was, of the 4 stairwells, 2 are next to the elevators. Leave those open all hours. But the other 2 that are opposite of each other, perhaps we can secure those, and downtown employees could have a code that they could access those stairwells in a safe manner and not be surprised when they come around the corners or coming up and down. Because that's really it. I talked to Tammy from City Pages last week, and her and I from time to time bounce ideas off each other, and she says, Mark, it's the stairwells. It's the stairwells, and it is, if you think about it, right? So it's not about the homeless. It's about creating safe places to traverse up and down a parking structure And I suggest that you consider, and Eric, I think, is looking into it, can you by code secure 2 stairwells? And what's the technology to do it, and what's the cost to do it? And I think we can do it. And whether you approve this tonight or approve this down the road, I think it leads us to a discussion that's important to this community, that there's people out there that are cold, they're hungry, there's no place to go, and I think we can find better solutions. I'm a big advocate of, wet homes where people can go that are drinking that they can't get to at the Salvation Army or the warming shelter. So I'm all favor it. I support this ordinance as is written. There's nothing in there about the homelessness. I think the fine was just there, so there's a trigger. It's not about the fine. I think Chief Blevin has made that very clear. I think Wausau PD is asking for the business community to help them with a tool that they can then come through and help a situation that's difficult for all of us. So I don't envy any of you, but I do ask that you support this and that we also continue to look at ways to solve the bigger issue that many of us are talking about tonight, and that's caring for the people that don't have a warm place to go. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Ms. Cindy Brigman.
Good evening. My name is Cindy Brigman. My address is 2655 Morning Dove Road, Cronenwetter. Thanks for your time tonight. I am not a resident of Wausau, but I am an employee of downtown Wausau. I've been working downtown for 15 years. I park daily on the Jefferson Street parking ramp, as do all of my peers and the people that work for me. I'm also the daughter of an alcoholic, veteran, and sometimes homeless father. The proposed ordinance is obviously a sensitive and controversial topic. It can be very difficult for all to view with an open mind and with an open heart, and unfortunately, I'm able to speak to you very personally from both sides of this issue. I've heard all of the concerns that have been presented thus far tonight. I think it's very clear that we have a very passionate community and we all care very deeply for the people who will be impacted by an ordinance. However, there are safety concerns that are not necessarily specific to the behavior of the homeless in Wausau that are not being portrayed in all of the stories that we're hearing. Reality is that there are people loitering and sometimes using the parking structure for illegal activity. We really don't have any way of knowing if those people do or do not identify as homeless in our community. The concerns that I'm going to share with you tonight are specific to issues that I see as safety concerns. The incidents that we have witnessed and reported were not necessarily directly related to a homeless individual or to a group of homeless individuals, but rather to loitering in our parking ramp. Employees have been approached by people asking for money, and when that money is not offered, those employees are essentially verbally assaulted. We've been told that we will be at fault if those individuals die because we don't support their next fix. That's a difficult conversation to have and be approached with. I've personally opened the door to the stairwell during lunch to pass through and found individuals engaging in sexual activity in public, at lunch. Frequently in the mornings, as employees are coming to work between the hours of 6 and 8 a.m., they enter and they encounter people not only sleeping in the stairwell or in front of elevator doors, but they appear to be passed out, as you can smell the smell of alcohol or an empty bottle laying beside them, feces, vomit, or urine that we have to step through or pass to get to our desk at work every day. This isn't not only a safety issue, it's a health concern. It's not uncommon to pass through groups of people who do not necessarily appear to be homeless, but nonetheless are loitering in either the skywalks, the stairwells, or the ramp itself. And as you can imagine, this is just a small sampling of the situations that we have experienced downtown. And as we can surely all appreciate, being a female and leaving the building alone, not knowing what's around the next corner can be very troubling and uncomfortable, can be a trigger for a female who's been assaulted. These are not situations that are minor inconveniences for those of us who work downtown and park in the Jefferson Street ramp and other ramps in the area. These situations present risk, and they make employees and visitors feel threatened. Downtown businesses do pay for their employees to park in these ramps, and our employees should not have to fear for their safety every day. It is my opinion that the ordinance is the first step to improve a difficult situation that has presented itself in our community, and I would ask that you vote in favor of an ordinance that allows our authorities to enforce action if and when necessary to remove those who are loitering in the ramp. One thing that we haven't mentioned yet is the open intoxicants piece of this ordinance as well.
Ms. Brigman, you are over 3 minutes,
Okay.
just to let you know.
Okay, I thank you very much, and I would just encourage everybody to take an active role in our community with our nonprofits who desperately need our help.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next up will be Ms. Pam Anderson.
Good evening, everyone. I am Pam Anderson. My address is 165419 River Road, and I'm actually a resident of Ringgold. However, I'm here tonight to represent the Marathon County Housing and Homelessness Coalition's Leadership Committee. On behalf of the Marathon County Housing and Homelessness Coalition Leadership Committee, we thank you very much for this opportunity to comment on the proposed loitering ordinance. The vision of our coalition is to eradicate homelessness throughout Marathon County by collaboratively raising awareness, defining needs, and finding solutions for housing challenges. This ordinance has been a catalyst for a large community discussion on the issue of homelessness. At the coalition, we are invigorated by the community-wide discussion and hope that it will lead to a groundswell of participation in finding solutions. The Marathon County Housing and Homelessness Coalition drafted a 10-year plan to end homelessness in 2015. As part of this plan, our Housing Solutions Subcommittee has spent time identifying and reducing barriers to housing and brainstorming solutions. This proposed ordinance has some consequences that adversely affect our community-wide plan. Criminalization laws harm our community and clients. Fines from law violations create a cycle of financial drain on people experiencing homelessness. And the citations and fines create more barriers to employment and housing. Criminalization laws do not work to end homelessness. Loitering laws frustrate effective solutions by erecting additional housing barriers and disconnecting homeless persons from supportive service providers. Finally, the ordinance highlights but proposes no solutions to a large community problem. Our community does not currently have enough housing options for our homeless and housing-challenged citizens. On behalf of the coalition, we want to issue a call to action. We ask that the City Council to table this ordinance, and we ask the Council, County Board, all businesses, including the downtown businesses, Police Department, and concerned citizens to join us in finding a better solution. And with that, I want to thank you for allowing us to come and talk tonight about the ordinance. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for all your comments this evening. This has been an issue that the city has been addressing for several years now. I know it's a very tough issue, but it has been something that the city has been trying to take care of in some ways. We are scheduled for meetings coming up here in the next few weeks, next couple of days, actually, for discussions with all the stakeholders involved. So just to give you an update on that, thank you all very much. Okay, then, moving on to communications for the Board of Public Works. File number 061215 for insurance claims from July 2019 through September 2019. Council members, you have received a copy of that for the record. And then we'll move on to the consent agenda for files, starting with file number 190901 from the council, the minutes of the previous meeting from October 22nd of this year, and ending with file number 19-0108 from Public Health and Safety, a resolution approving or denying the various licenses as indicated. I'll entertain a motion to accept. Mrs. Tao. Well, let me get the motion first, please. If I could get a motion by Mr. Peckham, a second.
I'm sorry, actually, I wanted one of the items pulled. I came late, so I didn't get a chance to inform all of you.
Which one would you like pulled?
181106, the Sherman Street for the UDD.
Okay,
Can you pull that from the consent agenda?
done.
Okay, give me a minute to get this updated. We need a first and a second. Once it's been changed, we can do it with Pat there doing it too.
Okay, I did get a motion by Mr. Peckham to accept the rest. Do I have a second, please? By Ms. Lawrence, thank you.
Okay. Let's try it this way.
And then we will move that one file, 18-1106, for the resolutions and ordinances.
This is not cooperating today. There we go. No, I'll just have to fix it later. The machine's not going to let me do it. Okay, so we had a first by Pat Peckham, and I'm sorry, a second?
Sent by Mrs. Lawrence.
Okay. You may begin voting. Motion has passed unanimously.
And then we'll move on to the public hearing as far as proposed.
We should address
Go
it.
ahead, you're right.
We'll do the item you pulled off the consent.
Okay. File number 18-1106 from the Plan Commission, a resolution amending the precise implementation plan at 2005 Sherman Street in a UDD Unified Development District. Plan Commission approves 7-0. Mrs. Towle?
Thank you so
You
much.
should still have a
You should get a motion.
first and a second, please.
Motion by Mr. Nutting, second by Mr. Smith.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. I've always opposed this plan from the beginning. I've always been concerned about the setback for the homes that are being built there, especially on a really busy Sherman Street. I live on Sherman Street, so I know the level of traffic that's traveled on that road. So therefore, I asked for this to be pulled off the consent agenda so that I can vote no on this. So thank you.
All right, you may begin voting. Sorry about that. Motion has passed 8-2.
All right, now I'll open up if there's anybody that'd like to come forward to have a public hearing about any questions with the 2020 proposed City of Wausau budget. Would anybody like to come forward and address this matter? Anybody like to come forward and speak about the budget? And one more time, would anybody like to come forward and speak? Okay, I'm declaring the public hearing closed. We'll move on then to the mayor's appointments. With file number 19-1103, we have one. For the Citizens Advisory Committee for Community Development Block Grant, this would be Ingrid Clark Zavadorsky. Her resume and letter of interest is attached for your approval. Otherwise, if there's no questions, I'll entertain a motion to accept. Motion by Mr. Peckham. Do I have a second? By Mr. Neal.
Begin voting. Motion has passed unanimously.
File number 021219, a joint resolution of the Human Resources Committee and the Finance Committee creating a longevity plan for non-represented employees. Committee action. Human Resources approved 5-0. Finance failed it 0-4. The fiscal impact will be approximately $50,000. Entertain a motion to accept by Mr. Neal. Do I have a second? By Mr. Gisselman. And let's see who was first. Let's go with Mr. Neal.
Why, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yeah, you can see here the kind of stark difference between the two committees' votes on this issue. And in the Finance Committee's minutes, I noticed that there was a mention that possible passing of of option 3 in our payment, or in our salary structure, might make this a not necessary step. So, and that was part of the discussion to vote it down in finance. I look at the proposed budget, which we'll be talking about later this evening, and I see that option 3 is not really well represented in terms of what's been brought to us tonight. So I would go back and say, let's let's pass this resolution for the longevity plan, which HR committee unanimously voted for.
Mr. Martins?
Thank you, Mayor. In this resolution, I did vote aye on this in HR, and in finance, I did vote nay. While I do believe that it is a good, on an HR standpoint, it is a good proposal financially, was hoping that we could move it forward, or move option 3 forward in the salary study. Which would make the longevity plan more of a moot point, not being, making a proposal to table the motion in the Finance Committee, did not receive a second, so it failed in Finance, and I will probably vote no in this motion here tonight.
Mrs. Rasmussen?
Thank you. I feel like the HR committee's heart was in the right place with trying to bring this forward, but what I will tell you is where the rubber meets the road is we can't afford it. We can't afford it and we can't sustain it. And the long-term impact of this, what it essentially does is it, in some ways, undermines the salary study. The goals of our salary study that we paid for was to make sure that people are compensated fairly for the job they do. And what the longevity plan really does is it places a value on time and not necessarily on the task performed. And so what happens is you find yourself rewarding someone for occupying a position for a longer period of time than someone else. And sometimes what happens in our salary grid is you'll have compression where, someone who's been on the job 20 years will find that they don't make that much more than someone that's been on the job for 8 years. But at the end of the day, there's a top end to what you can learn for certain jobs. At some point, whether it be 5 years, 8 years, whatever, you know everything you need to know to do that job. And you can't continue to financially reward somebody that's qualified to do the job, but has essentially just been showing up 12 years longer than the person next to him. And, barring any new skills, any new responsibilities that have been acquired by that person, all we're rewarding is tenure. And so this plan really becomes a monster that you can't sustain, and this is funded by the levy. So we are going to ask, if this passes, we're going to go back and ask the taxpayers of Wausau to just reward people for being on duty longer than the person next to them, even if both people are competent and both people are properly trained. Now, there's a weight to be placed on institutional knowledge, but there's a top end to that too. And so often you'll hear employees within the work group say, well, if someone's not going to recognize my time on the job, I'm leaving. Yet, the statistics collected by our HR department indicate that that's not why people leave. And I think that before we pass a plan like this, we should hear from the HR chairman, and I think we should hear from the HR director, as far as the discussions that have been had around implementing and sustaining this plan. Because while this would make people happy within the work groups, we can't afford this level of happiness. In 2019, when we implemented the wage study with option 2, most of the workforce got a raise. And we can't help the fact that some people have been redlined because when the wage study came through, some of those people were above the market rate to begin with. And, it might be a sad state, but public employees all know what one another make. And that creates tension in the workplace when, 2 employees, one tenured a little longer than the other, finds out that the new person doesn't make that much less than they make, then there's sour grapes about that. But in the private sector, that's not how it works. You come to work, you do the job, you get paid for the job, you get rewarded based on your performance, or not. And the employer doesn't give wage increases that they can't afford and can't sustain. Our budgets cannot take a hit like this. And, in our budget discussion, we're going to talk about option 3. And the plan we've come forward with option 3 is a phased-in approach because that also is all we can afford. And we can't, in good conscience, roll out a budget to the taxpayer that essentially creates an unsustainable situation that we can't afford to fund and essentially ramps up the mill rate, not a penny or two, 50 or 60 cents. We don't have that kind of money. And it's not fair to the residents that pay the bills around here for us to authorize a plan like this and a full immediate implementation of option 3. So I can't possibly support this, and I'd like to hear from the HR director after the others comment.
Mr. Smith?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. When I was looking at this, I contacted our Director of Human Resources and sent her a list of questions that she was good enough to answer. And I've got a couple of them here that may be telling. One of my questions was, how do the wages of Redline employees compare with a person doing a similar job for a surrounding municipality? Answer. In our recent wage study, Gallagher established a market rate for each non-represented city job. Market rates were established using both public and private sources. The top salary range our employees are redlined at represents 20 to 25% above the current market rate. Secondly, I asked her a question. I said, what is the projected cost of the implementation of this program in 2020 and going forward? Answer, these are pure cost numbers and do not include ancillary increases such as pension payments, Social Security, etc. It does not distinguish between levy and non-levy funding sources. The cost in 2020 is $43,820. 2021 is $47,225. In 2022, it's $50,150. That comes out to $141,195 over the next 3 years. Anybody got an idea how we're going to get that? Thank you.
Mrs. Tao?
I thought your light went up first. Thank you so much, Mayor. First of all, I want to share that anyone who's been in a leadership role or a management role that have staff reporting to them, I think that it's always, we always understand that our workforce is the most critical, right? You can only get as far as how well your talent pool is and the people that you take care of. I certainly agree with one or two of the department directors who were surveyed about the longevity opportunity here. And I walked away with it feeling like we really just insulted some of these employees, but let me step back for a moment. Thank you to the Director of HR for all your hard work, but I think that we completely undermine the people who've invested their career here. I would have loved to see us move towards the option 3, which may have created some more opportunities for us to reward and recognize all staff up and down the spectrum. And so I'm very concerned that this is on the agenda tonight. I hope that most of you will vote this down. I'm voting it down because I think that we can do better. And we talk about how we don't have it in the budget, but if you take a look at the last 12 months, we found money somewhere. And I think that we talked about in a former council meeting about looking at option 3 and being able to budget that starting in 2020, right? So there is money somewhere, and let's start taking care of our people. But I think that what's in front of us today is very insulting for those that have invested their long-term career here with the city of Wausau. Thank you.
Mr. Gisselman?
HR Director, if, you've been, I'm certainly willing to yield at this point. I will have some questions later on, but evidently the City Council looking for your input this evening.
Thank you. The longevity program was a very difficult topic from the first point that it came forward. We brought it forth first at the committee level as just a discussion item to kind of get a feeling from the committee of what they were looking for. And getting a consensus, even at that initial discussion at the committee level, was really pretty difficult. There were a lot of really diverse feelings on the topic and different kind of hopes and plans for what longevity was going to address. And I think that was also reflected when we surveyed our department heads. There were a lot of different answers and a lot of lack of consensus. Back after Act 10, and I want to say 2012, when the city of Wausau restructured its salary scale, we built longevity into the salary scale. So essentially at that time, longevity went away. It never existed for non-represented employees. It was always just a union benefit. And what we did was we created a longer salary scale where employees advance through the salary scale according to their longevity, or their amount of tenure they had with the city. So instead of getting a separate check at certain points in your career, you got one every year. And then we went to pay for performance, and then we returned to a step system. So there's been a lot going on for the city of Wausau with its compensation, which complicates the issue. Longevity, there's certainly nothing prohibiting the city from implementing a separate longevity program, but it is a bit of a duplication of effort. Now, is that a bad thing? No, I mean, ultimately, the decision for this item rests with the council shoulders, and we've tried to give you as much information as we can. I think everyone's kind of acknowledged that it's a really complicated topic, and I don't know if anyone has any direct questions for me.
So the other represented unions within the city, the fire department, the police department, transit workers, do they have a longevity benefit?
They do, and it's a little bit different for every union.
But
and
that was all negotiated out through negotiations and bargaining, correct?
It was, yes. And previously, DC 48 did have a longevity plan with the city, but that union decertified after Act 10, and so that's when longevity got built in for everybody. And it's a bit different for every union. This most closely mirrors what our transit union receives.
So, but to be fair, to be fair to the city of Wausau that are not represented, or they're not negotiating their benefit package every year or every 2 years, this would be a benefit that really would be putting those workers on par with the rest of the union contracts, correct?
The salary structures for our represented positions are very different from our non-represented positions. So they don't advance to the 20 to 25% above market value that our non-represented people do. They advance, but not to that great of a degree. But yes, if we're talking strictly like, do they get longevity and everybody else doesn't, that's correct.
So chances are Act 10 will go away someday, I would think, and we don't know that, but maybe it does. And then the city hall and the other unions will become negotiations, and most likely this will be a benefit that they will seek after. I voted for this in HR. I think this is a big benefit. I think that our employees do more than just show up every morning to do their work. I think they bring a lot of experience and a lot of negotiating with public with them every day. And I think that grows with our employees. So I think that we should honor their expertise that grows with every employee every year. And I think that this is one benefit that we can establish. Can you explain also how this reacts to option 3? Because I see this as two really separate issues, because option 3 really is on an individual basis, bringing certain individuals up to a certain standard.
Sure.
So can you explain the difference? Because I think sometimes they're mixing these two issues up.
Yeah, I can explain that. And I think one of the reasons why these two items have come a bit aligned is that option 3, if you recall from our wage study implementation, was whether there was going to be an implementation option granted to individuals who were above midpoint. And generally speaking, individuals who are above midpoint have more than 10 years of tenure with the city of Wausau because of the way our salary structure works. So longevity and option 3 are talking about that same pool of employees, which is one of the reasons why it came together. When we were discussing this at a committee level, we investigated whether we wanted this to specifically apply just to redlined employees, who would be those employees who reach the maximum salary. One of the concerns that came up at the committee level was if you get a new job, you're not redlined anymore, and there was a distaste for giving longevity to individuals and then taking it away just because one received a promotion. So that's the reason why the policy was drafted in the way that it was. But strictly speaking, option 3 is talking about implementing people who are above midpoint to the salary step that Gallagher determined they should be at based on their tenure and their current job title, and that affects only individuals who are above the midpoint or market value for their current salaries. And longevity is a program that rewards individuals for tenure with the city of Wausau that starts from their hire date, not their job seniority, so it's a little bit different that way. And it would apply for everybody at 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, et cetera.
Because the discussion later on with regard to the budget, and I think that the city council needs to see that there is this longevity issue is quite separate from option 3, which we'll have another discussion on later on, but I think that is separate, and I originally voted for this, and I will continue. I think that this is one benefit that we gather in some form or another with other employees of the city, and I think that we have to do our best with the employees that are not represented by their local union.
I think both topics have a fiscal impact, which is another reason why maybe we end up discussing them at the same time.
Mrs. Rasmussen.
Thank you. I just want to remind us that $25,000 equals 1 cent on the mill rate. So when you add up the impacts of this, your cost to continue budget keeps going up and up and up every year. Your cost continue is incrementally higher. With option 3, it's as bad or worse. Like it or not, cities have lost revenue sources, especially in shared state aids, since 2008. And not a whole lot of that funding has been restored. We find ourselves faced with expenditure restraints. We find ourselves faced with reduced shared revenue, reduced transportation aids. Now, some of the transportation aids have recently been increased under the new administration, thank heavens. But that said, we don't have a huge influx of new revenue or restored revenue that we can pay for all these things with. And, what I would say is that, whether we like or dislike the financial ramifications of Act 10, that did provide some relief to cities that were also faced with reductions in aid. And so if we start adopting plans like this that have a sustainability cost and things like option 3 that have a larger sustainability cost, all of the financial benefits gained from those revisions are essentially lost. We can't go back and pretend that the time that we wasted on merit pay never happened. We can't pretend the recession didn't happen. But we were in a position, and I think many of us forget, we were in a position between 2009 and 2012 where we had pay freezes. We had to furlough our employees to make ends meet. We had dozens of vacancies we couldn't fill. And, we were in a position where to make ends meet, sometimes we were just praying people would retire, and then we didn't hire anybody because you couldn't. And I don't ever want us to get in a position like that again. So if anybody thinks that not approving things like this are abusing or mistreating our workforce, no. The things we had to do to make ends meet those years, that was worse. And if we put ourselves in a position where we're behind the 8 ball like that again, that's just not being a responsible steward of our resources. We need to implement things that we can afford to pay for. And we cannot allow ourselves to write checks that the taxpayer can't cash. And so, even though we want to do things that feel good and that resonate with the workforce in a positive way, we all do. It feels great to vote yes to stuff like that. But that's why the Finance Committee voted no, because we know we can't afford it. And so I would ask you to not support this longevity plan. And then we need to have a serious talk about option 3 in our budget discussion.
Mrs. Tao.
Well, with all due respect, President Rasmussen, if we behaved like it was our own checkbook, we probably wouldn't have made the decisions we did in the past 12 months on non-budget neutral opportunities or agenda items that have come forward. So I wish we can live by those values going forward. So I appreciate your comments. Just a clarification, Tony, option 3, based on what I was listening to the conversation with Gary and you speaking, opportunity or option number 3 has no huge impact to the non-represented employees on the agenda item that we're talking about right now. So there's no real value of option 3. We're talking about 2 separate things tonight, the longevity plan and option 3, so that we don't confuse things, because I might change my vote based on what I heard just earlier. So is there any real value in option 3 for the group of employees that we're talking about tonight regarding the longevity plan? Because if they're not going to benefit from option 3, then my vote's going to change tonight.
Well, option 3 wouldn't impact if longevity is granted, option 3 wouldn't change the amount that an individual gets through the longevity plan. But we're talking about the same group of employees who would receive increases under the 2 different proposals.
That's exactly what I need to hear.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay. No further discussion? We have a motion by Neal, a second by Gisselman. You may begin voting. That motion has failed 3-7.
File number 03-1110, a joint resolution of the Human Resources Committee and the Finance Committee, creating a layout plan for part-time parking cashiers. Committee action, the HR approved 5-0, Finance approved 4-0, fiscal impact a cost-saving measure of approximately $63,000. I'll entertain a motion to accept. Motion by Mr. Nutting. Do I have a second? By Mr. Neal.
Begin voting. Motion has passed unanimously.
File number 03-1112, a joint resolution of the Human Resources Committee and the Finance Committee, approving an increase to the mayoral salary rate. Committee action, Human Resources approved 5-0, the Finance Committee approved 3-1. Fiscal impact will be $3,456 included in the proposed 2020 budget. Entertain a motion to accept. Motion by Mr. Nutting. Do I have a second? By Ms. Lawrence.
Oops. Haven't had you in the system yet. That was unusual. All right, you may begin voting. That motion has passed 8-2.
File number 90-1140, a joint resolution of the Human Resources Committee and the Finance Committee reclassifying the Public Housing Manager to Assistant Director of Community Development Authority. Committee action, Human Resources approved 5-0, the Finance Committee approved 3-1. Fiscal impact for 2019 would be $164 plus benefits. For 2020, it will be a 1.5 greater annual increase. I'll entertain a motion to accept. Motion by Mr. Neal. Do I have a second? By Mr. Gisselman. He beat you, Pat, sorry.
Begin voting. That motion has passed 10-1.
And real quick, before we get on to file number 19-1109, recently I gave an interview to WSAU Radio regarding our budget that I believe now could be somewhat confusing to our residents. To clarify what I had stated, to make sure the record is right, Wausau's mill rate has increased the last few years. However, the amount of that increase that is needed to maintain services is expected to be less this year than what it has been experienced in previous years. The increase is $22 on a $100,000 home. For 2020, Wausau will borrow less for capital and projects than it pays off on its debt, which excludes a water or sewer utilities borrowing, which is not part of the city's debt, as a utility is responsible for its own debt and borrowing. Just want to get that out there so people know what's going on. Moving on then to file number 19-1109, a resolution of the Finance Committee adopting the 2020 City of Wausau budget and general property tax to support the same. Committee action approved 5-0. The fiscal impact will be a levy of $29,545,999.66, including tax increments. Mr. Nutting, I have a motion by. Do I have a second by Mr. Smith? Mr. Neal.
Thanks again, Mr. Mayor. I applaud the Finance Committee's work, meeting in several sessions to go over this in the finest detail possible, I'm sure. And it's nice to see the recommended budget from an increase point of view. My one question is with regards to option 3. It's listed as a funded item at $20-some thousand. And I would just like to have, for everybody here and for me, an explanation of what that item represents. What is that money for? How it would be, and what does that say about the future of possible option 3?
We provided information for several kind of tiered approaches to implementing option 3 to the Finance Committee to consider. And the monies that are included, so if everybody recalls, when an employee is less than midpoint, they're getting step increases of 3%. And after midpoint, those step increases change to 1.5%. And what this money does is it funds people who would receive an implementation increase to get a 3% increase next year instead of that 1.5% increase. Thank you.
Mrs. Rasmussen?
Thank you. This is the discussion that I was referring to. So the Finance Committee took great pains to find a way that we could consider option 3 and still pay the bill. And so we asked for options, and the HR department was gracious enough to give us a number of choices. And so we chose the approach that has the lowest mill rate impact for the taxpayer, but still gets us where we're going. And it's important to recognize that option 3 impacts 14 employees, not the entire workforce, 14 people out of 400. Option 2 canvassed almost the rest of them. And so, you know, and this is impactful to the 14 people, obviously. But as an example, one of the 14 gets a $30,000 raise. So I want the taxpayers to be clear on what this all means. And that person is not underpaid to begin with. So that's why we chose the most conservative possible approach. And the reason we chose the most conservative possible approach is we felt that if we could not find any way to fund option 3, based on in some form, based on the sentiment voiced by the HR committee, we were pretty confident that we would get the entire budget back to reconsider some way to do it. But our first inclination was that we couldn't afford it at all. And so that said, a full implementation of option 3 costs $254,000 all at once. We don't have that kind of cash. But we figured if we can incrementally step our way into this and get people started on a path where they can get where the consultant felt they should be without biting off all of this elephant in a year or two, that's progress. And sometimes small progress is still progress. And so that's why we chose the 1.5% increase, and that those folks then will get the normal step plus 1.5%, like Tony said. But we didn't feel there was any other way that we could fund this. And so if our goal is to find any other or faster way to do this and spend any more money on it, then my next request is going to be that we find either staffing or departmental cuts that we're willing to offer up to pay the bill. And that's the wall that we're going to be up against. That's the wall the Finance Committee was up against. And the 5 of us worked awful hard to find a way that we could find compromise here. So I would just encourage us to be glad that we came up with any way to do this, because financially, this is a lot of money. And it does not benefit the vast majority of the workforce. It benefits 14 folks. Thank you.
Mr. Peckham?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was looking through the packet, and I was hoping to find something I was concerned about, and whether we're covering ourselves adequately as far as street reconstruction. And I know we all know full well that we need to keep up with that sort of thing, or it's going to bite us down the road, so to speak. Sorry about that. But I dug back in the archives, I guess, and a May 15th SISM committee, I believe, adopted a plan that would have us do Cedar Street, Kickbush Street, Eau Claire Boulevard, Emerson, Mount View, and Pied Piper. So that's 6 street reconstructions. And I'm hearing that that's been whittled, to use a nice term. I'm wondering where we're at, how much of that street reconstruction we're actually going to get done in 2020.
Mr. Lindman? Thank you.
Yeah, I guess I'll walk through what was actually brought to the CISM committee when we put together our capital budget for the infrastructure for 2020. It would total about 4.8 million. Over the past years, typically the city council has approved about 2.8 million. We brought that forward. That obviously that was not feasible to move forward as discussions through the capital budgets were discussed. Capital Improvement Committee discussed that as well. Right now, Cedar and Kickbush are the two major street reconstruction projects that we'll be doing in 2020. The Eau Claire Boulevard, along with those other 3 or 4 one-block streets, will be pushed to 2021. And that brings our infrastructure budget back down to around 2.8 million, 2.9 million.
Mrs. Rasmussen?
Thank you. On the subject of infrastructure, we continue to bolster the budget for seal coating, which hopefully staves off or at least extends the life of a lot of our streets, residential streets, so that we won't be looking at complete rebuilds as soon as we would be had we not been doing that effort. So we've been trying to boost up the budget for that. And the CIP committee did discuss all of those streets, and it was clear that the ones that got deferred as a group because they need to be constructed as a group. They're all in a common area. And so in discussions with Eric and the rest of the CIP committee, it seemed that if we had to defer any infrastructure, that would be the logical choice and hold it off to 2021. And that then also gives the residents in those areas some time to adjust to the fact that those assessments will be coming. And it also then will allow those neighborhoods to prepare for those projects, because when you have that many streets under construction in that area over the summer, that impacts events in that area as well. We all know that area is heavily utilized for events at the municipal airport and events at the East Bay Sports Complex. So hopefully we will have some time to also then prepare for the logistics of those projects as well, because that's going to be a big impact to those neighborhoods. And so if we had to hold something off, it made sense that we would hold those off as a group.
Ms. McElhaney?
Thank you. I'm going back to option 3. As chair of HR, I have delved into this wage study probably more than anybody else besides our HR director. I have spent numerous hours. I have talked to employees vast over the last year. Some are very upset, some are okay, and I talked to them about when we first decided between option 2 and option 3, and I told them, because the people that were calling me were mostly from the major outside of the 14 people, and they were calling for their coworkers, and I said, you know what I worry about? I wasn't on council when we had wage freezes and things like that. I said, we have a wage study that has decent wage increases every year, and we have that scheduled. I worry if we overdo on option 3, and then we don't know who's coming back to council. So what everybody's thoughts are, we don't know, and that gets whipped back, and then we don't have raises for everybody. We don't have, and they got it, most of them got it. And there's so much of the teeter-totter we have to do with this. And I voted against option 3 in HR initially. There was talk that it was going to be looked at seriously in 2020, and then as the finance was doing the budget, they said there's absolutely no way. Now, we can have the discussion, could we have had the money? And I think I'm very well known for my red light that I use for some things that we do. TIF districts, things like that, maybe we would have had money. But I lost those votes, so I have to look out. The other thing that I worry, if we're going to shoot the moon and raise the mill rate 60 cents, and that's what I was told, I want to remind everybody that our water and sewer rates are going up significantly. I just received an email with new projections of by 2025, our water rate is going up 59.68%, and our sewer is going up 84.88%. Now, that's a regressive tax because everybody uses water and sewer. I don't care if you're a renter or somebody that pays taxes, you're going to pay this. And wages are stagnant throughout. We can have that discussion about stagnant wages, and that's beyond City Hall. That's everywhere. But our residents have those stagnant wage jobs, a lot of them 2 jobs, and I worry that I am going to okay a budget that has a 60-cent mill rate increase for option 3 for 14 people. That's the teeter-totter. If we made different decisions and I could do this without the mill rate, all power. I think our employees do a great job. I'm not anti-employee. I've been called that. I'm not. For goodness sakes, why would I be? But we have to remember that there's just so much people can afford. And I worry about all of this. And as Lisa said, this is for 14 people. I want, do we do the good of a few, or do we do the good of the many that they keep getting raises that we can afford? And that is why I voted no, and I'm going to vote for this. I was happy that they put some option 3 in. That's something. But if we will have to make different decisions if we want to do this year after year. And I think that doesn't come at budget time. That comes starting in January of how we decide to spend our money.
Mr. Gisselman.
Yes, Tony. So with regard to this plan for option 3, evidently how do you see this being carried out? We have this plan for 2020. How do you see it being carried out into the future, 2021? So is there an idea in your head of how this comes to, sort of an end time to it? Because eventually we will most likely have another wage study, and that may or may not, we don't know what that's going to look like. But it seems like if we don't deal with this through some kind of a plan into the future, we'll be seeing these same types of issues 3 or 4 years down the road, because it's going to be showing up in the same type of wage study that we just got finished with. So how do you have a plan?
Sure. Well, the city conducts wage studies every 5 years, so you're right. And that eventually we will, probably by the time we're just getting over our nightmares from this one, we'll get another one. But right now, it was just proposed as far as for next year's budget. So, council at this point would not be voting or acting upon any future actions. Some of the options that came forward brought us all the way through the 1.5, the extra step, which is reflected in your current budget. Doesn't have an ongoing plan, so ultimately at the next year's budget, we'd look at the remaining amount of funding and have several other options again on how we wanted to approach that. So it likely would be an ongoing discussion for next year's budget session as well.
But there would really be no, I guess I'm looking out, 3 years or so, there would really be no completion of the max or the max of option 3. That we'll most likely never see that, the complete option 3 established.
I think that's not necessarily true. It would depend upon council's action in future budgets. Right now, based on our other budgetary items, what we're looking at is a particular portion of that, of kind of the total costs of option 3. Next year, council could choose to, maybe it's a really good budget year and we choose to fund the rest. Maybe we choose to divide it into 2 more years. We would have a number of options to consider in future years. It's just right now, we haven't projected that out.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Rasmussen?
Thank you. I'm glad that Tony and Gary mentioned that because future councils and future finance committees need the ability to work through this like we did. And if we were to lock into a future plan on behalf of all of those future councils and committees, their cost to continue is immediately high, and they have no room to work through the same process that we worked through. So I think that it's smart of us to get it started this year. And like Tony said, take a look at where we're at next year and the year after. Figure out what we can afford, if we can do it a little faster. Not everyone is at the same level of disparity either. So some people may get resolved in a year or two, and some may take a little longer. But I think that this is an entry point, and it's something that we can sustain in our budget. It's not, like Becky said, shooting for the moon, because we can't do that. But I think future councils need to have that flexibility and not be bound to a cost to continue that's etched in stone for them on this payroll end. So I think this is, it's the best possible way we can do anything with option 3 and still be able to afford it.
Mr. Gisselman, were you finished asking your question? I'm sorry if we missed you. Did you want to go ahead, or? Okay. Mrs. Tao?
Tony, remind me again, how much do we pay for the wage study?
The wage study, the estimate we got came in at 80,000, but we ended up coming in under budget.
Okay, 80,000, and approximately your guesstimate, how many hours did the HR committee and you and your team spend on the wage study? Just take a guess.
Yeah, it would be very difficult to estimate, but as Becky mentioned,
Hundreds of hours,
probably.
probably?
A lot of time. Yeah.
Okay, and remind me again too, in the past, didn't we say it was a compromise for us to not go with option 3, even though that was the recommended option from the HR committee, and we went with the other 2 options?
I think it's fair to term option 2 as a compromise.
Okay, so what I would like to remind council members is that selecting option 3 or getting the full budget for option 3 just doesn't benefit 14 people. We would actually have benefited everyone because we would have implemented options 1, 2, and 3 based on the recommendations that came out of the wage study. I would hate to see $80,000 fall to the wayside and this whole method of, well, we at least did something, right? You know, they're getting a 1.5%. And we did something better than nothing. We practice that all the time, and I think that we can do better. And we can say, you know what? All the amount of hours that city staff and committee members spent on trying to improve and get this to be exactly what all of us would like it to be to benefit the workforce, I think that the option 3, if fully budgeted, would have taken care of all the recommendations that came out of that wage study. So thank you for answering my questions for me.
Okay, not seeing any further discussion, further comments or discussion. We have a motion by Nutting, second by Smith, to approve the resolution of Finance Committee adopting the 2020 City of Wausau budget and property tax to support same. You may begin voting. That motion has passed 9-1.
And let's see, ordinance of the Public Health and Safety for file number 19-1105, creating section 10.48.121, trespassing on parking meter lot or ramp, and section 10.48.122, possession and consumption of intoxicants prohibited. I'm just wondering if Chief Bliven would like to come forward and speak on this, or? Oh, I'm sorry, forgive me. If I could get a motion by Mr. Neal, second by Mr. Nutting. And if you could come forward, Ben, and address this, please.
Good evening. I'm going to talk just for a little bit about the discussion that I think our community is having around homelessness, and I'll talk about that broadly, and then I'm going to talk more narrowly about the ordinance specifically. You know, I lived in this community most of my life. I've worked at the police department for 20 years. And I think I understand this community, and what I love about this community is the fact that people are willing to come to the table to discuss important issues. I really appreciate the fact that this room is filled tonight, because so many times in the past when there are really pressing important issues that this council is hearing, this room is empty. So I think it's really good that we have community members here engaged in this process. And I'll be straightforward that you know, I've had long discussions. I've had sleepless nights over this ordinance, but I'll share my thoughts a little bit on that tonight. There's a lot of work that's being done in our community, and I think that is something that has been missing from some of the conversation. You know, there are people in this room that have given a lot of their lives to working on homelessness, to working to end poverty, and to find warm places for people to stay. And there's a spectrum of homelessness. You know, there's, you know, the people that we see sometimes downtown that don't have a place to be and they're sleeping in the elements, and there are people that are near homeless who are, you know, one medical issue away from losing their home. And I would say on that spectrum, our police officers experience and interact with those folks probably as much as any organization in this community. So I think we have a good understanding of the problem that exists. The Housing and Homelessness Coalition has been working on this issue for a long time. The Salvation Army has been in our community for decades trying to work on this issue. Catholic Charities has the Warming Center. That's been here for several years. They've been working on this issue for a long time. An organization called North Central Community Action Program has been working in this community for a long time on this issue. And you know, there are certainly many churches. Our Wausau Community Development Authority works on Section 8 housing and works to get people housed. So there's a lot of work being done in this community around homelessness, and that's why I love this community, because I know that people are willing to come to the table to give of their time and money to impact the lives of other people in our community. And I say all that because it's obvious that this isn't an easy issue to resolve. It takes time. People have been working for decades on this problem, and it still exists. It's growing. So it's not an easy issue to resolve. And this may not be a popular statement, but I'm going to say it, and I think we're a resource-rich community around homelessness. I think there are a lot of resources in our community that really make it so that the problem isn't as big as it could be. So there are a lot of resources here in our community. There are some great people that are coming together to make proposals to our community around solutions. It's not my place to say, but there are a couple of people that I'll be bringing people in this room together tomorrow to talk about an exciting venture in trying to resolve some of these issues and concerns. You know, we are working on a task force that'll be meeting in the first part of December. Some of the people up here are involved in that task force. We have community leaders that will be working with trained facilitators to talk about the issue, define the problem, and work on solutions. So these are all things that have been in the works for some time. And again, this is an issue that takes time. So, you know, all that to say that there is a lot of work being done on homelessness, and you know, it's a community that cares, and we are going to be able to make progress because there is a lot of work that's being done on that issue. So to talk a little more narrowly about this ordinance, why do we need it? It's, you know, you heard from a couple of people that I've met with, that other city leaders and officials have met with, to talk about the behaviors that they're experiencing in the ramps in our downtown. And those issues are, you know, people that are sleeping in the stairwells, people that are urinating and defecating and engaging in sexual activity and drinking alcohol and harassing people that are in the ramps. And so they've asked the police to solve that problem for them. And so this ordinance is not a solution to homelessness. We've never proposed it to be a solution to homelessness. We have proposed this to solve the narrow issue of the behaviors that are experiencing in the ramp. Now, some of those individuals are homeless, and that's where this discussion comes in. So that's what we're asking the city council to consider, is a policy. What is your policy going to be in terms of behaviors in the ramp? Are those behaviors allowable or are they not? That's what we're asking you to consider. And we're the law enforcement arm of the city, and we will follow whatever direction you give us tonight in the way of an ordinance. So one of the questions that we've been asked a lot is, will we issue citations? I don't know the answer to that, but we probably will issue citations. I don't foresee us issuing many citations, but again, I don't know. Our intention is going to be to make contact with people, ask them to move along, ask them if they need resources, which is a question that we always ask the people. Can we get you someplace? Can we get you to Salvation Army? Can we get you to the warming center? Some people decline. They don't want to go to the warming center or Salvation Army. As hard as that is to believe, that there are people that say, no, we don't want those resources. I'll go somewhere else. And we can't force them to utilize the resources that exist. So we will encounter those offenders or those individuals in the ramp, and we'll ask them to leave. If they are frequent offenders and they do it on a regular basis, then potentially we'll issue a citation. If they flat refuse to leave, potentially we'll issue a citation. And what will be the result? The result will be a citation that they would have to go through our municipal court. One misnomer that has been talked about a lot in social media and in the media is that this is criminalizing homelessness because people are going to go to jail when they can't pay the fine. The city of Wausau, in the 20 years I've been here, we have never issued a warrant for failure to pay on a municipal citation. We don't take people to jail for failure to pay on a municipal citation, so that isn't an issue here. But the municipal court also has other options. The city attorney's office has the ability to work on a deferred judgment, which means that they can say, we'll dismiss this citation if you don't violate these restrictions for the next period of time, maybe 6 months or so. The judge has the ability to not issue a fine in terms of a monetary fine, but assign them community service instead. So there are other options besides a fine. At the end of the day, we need the city council to give us direction on this. And I appreciate the fact that there's so many people here and there's so much discussion around this issue. But my perspective is that this ordinance does nothing to positively or negatively impact homelessness. It impacts the behaviors that are occurring in the ramp. I would say in about 25 minutes, our Marathon County Board is meeting, and they will be discussing their 2020 budget. I think there should be, people from this room should know that they're looking at cutting funding to nonprofits. There's a 4-year plan to reduce and eliminate funding for nonprofits. One of those nonprofits is North Central Community Action Program. They receive funding from the county board that they use as local match for grants. We're talking about that cut costing our community hundreds of thousands of dollars in help for our homelessness issue. That's an issue that will positively or negatively impact our community in regards to homelessness. So I think that there's other issues that also need to be discussed in here, and I hope that that those issues are discussed. And we at the police department, I know the individuals in our city council, I've talked to many of you about this issue. I know that you're committed to resolving the issues of homelessness. I know at your annual meeting you talked about homeless being a major issue. And I know that there's probably going to be a request at the end of our discussions and facilitated discussions, and we'll probably be back in front of you asking for resources in order to implement those programs. And I hope that these discussions are brought back at that time, and we can have good discussions around that. So I'm happy to answer questions if there's any questions that you guys might have. Or
Mrs. Rasmussen?
Thank you. I read some of your Facebook posts from the weekend also, Ben, and I think that you made a compelling point in that we need to define as a policy-making body what behaviors we will and will not accept in a taxpayer-owned facility. And so that's where the rubber meets the road is, are we going to tell our police department that these behaviors are not okay and that they are approved to address the concerns of the ramp users? Or if we don't pass this ordinance, are we essentially implicitly condoning the behaviors because we've given them no tool to enforce with? Is that really your impression, Ben, as far as what the outcome is? If we don't create a policy, and there is no policy, you're back to being rudderless with this whole thing.
Yeah, exactly, right. I think, there is some concern that, why don't we just enforce the rules and the laws that are on the books, whether that might be disorderly conduct or lewd and lascivious behavior, that kind of thing. And we can, and we do, or drug activity, if there's drug activity going on, why don't we just enforce that? And we do. But there are certain behaviors that aren't illegal, such as sleeping, and a lot of times the individuals that are sleeping are they wake up and they ask people for money, they harass them like you heard today. So there are other behaviors that aren't implicit, just illegal, that we can't address. When we encounter these we don't always encounter the behaviors, we encounter people that are in the ramps that we can then ask to leave before there is an issue. So, that's.
Mrs. Tao.
I heard Mark Craig talk tonight in public comment about, having a compromise, and he really came forward with some really good ideas. And I know when you talked about, if this ordinance, maybe not pass tonight or it might pass, what are some ideas, right, from the council, or give some direction. I can't speak for the task force and how much time they may have put together to have discussions about this, and maybe I'm not aware, and this might be my ignorance, okay? But this feels like very reactionary of us. It's a very knee-jerk reaction. I've seen this type of behavior happen here in this very same room, and I think that we could have been very intentional and thoughtful about thinking about all the things, right, that may have impacted us bringing this ordinance forward. You talked about having the ability for the city hall to be able to defer the fine at our discretion, probably, right? Given, maybe it's not discretion, but if you don't behave in this way again in the next 6 months, we know that they're repeat offenders. So it's a behavior that's not going to go away. And I understand there are complexities to homelessness. And I want to share this with all of you, that being on this council for the last 18 months, we only talked about homelessness once. And that was in a meeting where we were doing strategic planning. And we threw that priority up on a white sticky paper, and I never heard about it again. So the only lessons learned I take away from this entire conversation, all the posting that the community has put out there, the text messages that I've received, is that we have a duty, we have a call to action, and we are being tasked to make homelessness a priority, for the city of Wausau, for this council. And that's the only thing I got out of this. So Ben, I really appreciate how you've done some of the community engagement to really help people understand from the perspective of the committee or task force. But I don't think this is going to solve the problem. It's greater than all of us. But I do like what Mark shared earlier in public comment, that we can secure the stairwells, right? We can put more cameras. Because I've done a tour at the Wausau PD. I've been told that there's 200 public cameras all over the city of Wausau. There are things that we could be contributing to make it better instead of this ordinance. So thank you.
Ms. McElhaney.
Thank you. I agree with Alder Tao that I think there was a piece missing with this ordinance. And the piece missing, and I've talked to quite a few people, some people in this room, for weeks, and the piece missing and what the residents want is what policy and procedure is in place to make sure no one's kicked out in the cold. We can say trespassing is not allowed and possession and consumption of intoxicants is prohibited. Okay. So we know that there are homeless that exhibit behaviors, exhibit substance abuse, and are not allowed in the shelters and the Salvation Army. What are you going to do with those? Because that's the piece that's missing. And residents want to be assured that you're not going to kick somebody out in the cold. I want to be assured. Is there a policy or procedure in place that we can put in place that says, you know, if this, if they cannot find, if they, you know, are not welcome at the warming shelter, it's full. If they're not available, you know, to go to Salvation Army, we need to make sure they have a place instead of get out. And that's, I think, the cry from the residents. That's the piece that they saw missing, and that's where the outcry came from. And that, I've thought a lot about this, and I need to be assured that that piece is there. And I understand the other issues. I got a call today from somebody who was verbally accosted in the parking ramp by Home Furniture today. He was shook. I don't know if this man has mental issues or what, but he was shook. And he said, I understand now. What we are trying to do, it's not the homelessness, it's the behaviors that we're trying to deal with. But we can't divide that and say, well, we're only going to worry about the behaviors because the homeless, that's why it's such a multifaceted thing. That's why all these organizations have worked for years and can't get their arms around this situation. So I really don't feel comfortable in accepting this ordinance as written. I want to see that other part.
Can I address that?
Yeah.
So, I mean, in practice, this has what has happened for years, you know, and this isn't anything new. It is probably something that few people are aware of how this actually works. There's 29 beds at Salvation Army, so they have 29 beds. The warming center is 25. If it's below 15 degrees, they have 5 additional beds that they can open, so they can have a maximum of 30. If there is somebody at the warming center that they can't physically get in because they're at capacity, they work to try to call family members or friends to say, is there one night that you can allow somebody to stay, you know, in your home? They tried their best to find somebody for them. If they don't have a place for them, they call us. They call the police, and we go there, and we have access to emergency vouchers for hotel rooms that we use on a very rare basis, as rare as possible, to get them into a hotel room. And that's the process. I am not aware of somebody who we have purposefully put out without offering to warm them somewhere. I can tell you that we have asked people to move on from the ramp. We've encountered people downtown that clearly don't seem to have a place to stay, and they refuse help. They refuse our offer of assistance, and there's nothing I can do about that. And so we need to continue to work on that problem, but so that's currently what's in place.
Well, that's exactly why I think that it was voted on to begin with. We knew you were doing that, but I don't know if they refuse. I don't want to see anybody die of hypothermia.
I don't either.
And, oh, I know you don't, but I mean, I you know, it comes down to that, doesn't it? Because if they're refusing help, but we want them out. I don't know, I mean, do you see where people are upset and they don't want that on their conscience, and I get that, and I don't know, is there a piece that's missing?
Yeah, I mean, we haven't solved the problem yet. We've been working for a long time. At the end of the day, people have the constitutional rights not to be taken into custody by police and forcibly taken places. They have the right to be out in the elements.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. You know, I've heard people come up and advocate for the homeless, and I believe with you, Chief, this is not, the ordinance doesn't say that this targets homeless. It targets people that are doing a certain type of behavior. Whether would it be me or anybody else at the council, if we were found sleeping in there under this ordinance, we would be asked to leave too. It's not, you just don't have to be homeless. And, you know, somebody mentioned, oh, I've got a warm house, and I would hate to have somebody be out in the cold. Well, I would be willing to bet you that the most of the people that are homeless once had warm houses, but their behavior lost them the houses, behavior they chose to do. Life is a bunch of decisions. You can have a good life or a bad life, depending on how many good or bad decisions you make. I don't want to feel that people that work for a living, come into that parking garage, have to be accosted by somebody wanting money, have to step over human urine and human feces just to get to work to make a buck. So my sympathy for people that sleep in those stairwells is almost, you would need an electron microscope to see it, because they put themselves in that position. They choose to be in that position. They sometimes refuse help. You know, Ms. McElhaney, you can't, if a person asks to leave and they don't want to go with the police to a warming, you can't put them in a headlock and drag them down to the warming center. If they have the constitutional right, like the chief said, to walk down the street and be out in the cold. That's their right. And when we start rounding up people because we think they might be cold, then we were becoming a police state, and I don't want to see that. And all of these people that are concerned about the homeless, I've got a suggestion. The city owns a big hump of property, it used to be called the Sears Building. We could put people in that, but we would need volunteers. So I wonder how many of the people that advocated for the homeless day would be willing to take a shift down there to supervise that. I would. Okay, good. See, we got a bunch of volunteers already. We're halfway there. Okay, get names and addresses in case we have to look them up again if they've changed their mind.
Sir, please sit.
Just sit down, please. That building could be utilized. I'm sure it has some kind of heat in it, keep the pipes from freezing. It has bathroom facilities. If it was supervised, maybe we don't have beds for everybody, but even sleeping on a rubber mattress inside is better than sleeping under a viaduct somewhere. So maybe we ought to look into that. All these homeless facilities, they have these beautiful mission statements. Yeah, they don't seem to be solving the problem. So maybe we're going to have to do it ourselves. Thank you.
Mrs. Rasmussen.
Thank you. I think we do have to maintain our focus, though, on what Ben said, is that the ordinance is about behavior. And it is by no means a solution to homelessness. We know that. But at the end of the day, we have got to decide as a policy-making body what is and is not acceptable in a public facility that we own, that we run, that we're responsible for. People cannot be unsafe using a public facility that they pay to use. That's what we need to keep our focus on. Approving this ordinance does not end the discussion in the community about homelessness. It will not end the discussion about homelessness. The council had Joe Volk up here a year and a half ago to try to help us start a community discussion about homelessness and figure out where local government fits as part of the solution. We have not made a ton of progress on that, but we are trying to bridge our efforts with those of the coalition. What happens is we get caught up in the weeds with things like this, but we need to keep our focus on what the real impact of the ordinance is, and it's solving a problem in a public facility. And so what I would hope we do, and I don't believe this precludes solutions. I think that the task force that Ben is working with, that a number of us are planning to sit on, can still have productive, collaborative discussions to find a real path to solutions. If there was a plan created in 2015 that we're having trouble implementing, then maybe people with the grit to solve it need to come around a table and figure out what the problem is. If there are roadblocks in our housing codes, in our building codes, in our ordinances that we can remove to make their work easier, that's where we fit. That's what we should be doing. And I think the discussion that's going to come out of these meetings is, where are these roadblocks? Do we need to do something with zoning so that more unrelated people can live in a house on a temporary basis? Probably. And we can do that. Do we need to find a way to develop wet houses and let that happen in the community and let people live in them? If they want to do that, if they choose that solution rather than an alcohol-free shelter? Probably. Do we need to find a way to, maybe find a way to facilitate emergency facilities or facilitate tiny house options? Maybe. And we've thought about all of that, but thinking and acting are two different things. And I think we're going to see some great action steps come out of the process that Ben is creating. We've already got some momentum. So I think that we can support this ordinance, but when we do, I think we also publicly need to promise this community and everybody that's come here tonight to talk about it that we will not stop looking for solutions and collaborating with people who create them. That's a commitment that we can afford to make to the coalitions and to our residents, that we will continue to collaborate with people that provide services, and we'll continue to try to find real action steps that maybe we can't solve it as government either. But if we can find a way to help them solve it and help them be a part of the solution that makes their work easier, that's where we fit. And so I hope that we support the ordinance, and I hope that we support it with the caveat that everybody walks out of here tonight knowing that we intend to keep talking and working toward real solutions. And I think then we can do both things. We can solve the behaviors in the ramp, and we can further the discussion in the community and get some results finally. So I hope we support it, and then I hope we also are willing to make that commitment to the city, to our community.
Mrs. Lawrence, or Miss Lawrence, excuse me.
Thank you. Maybe Lisa and I were separated at birth, because that's kind of what I wanted to say. I certainly support this ordinance because it is a tool for the police officers to do their job, to carry out public safety in part of our community. A vote for this ordinance, to me, does not mean a vote against homeless people. People I knew became homeless a few years ago, and they lived in my house penny-free for 4 months while I lived in my daughter's basement next to Tom Neal. So, I mean, it can happen to anybody. You don't have to be mentally ill or making poor decisions. Bad things happen with people and their jobs and their mortgages and their health. And it could, any of us could be a step away from facing that problem ourselves. But I'd just like to thank Lisa for what she said. As long as I'm around, I'd like to support the efforts the chief informed me of that are going on, and I hope some good announcements do come out. There's a lot of money in this community. The city of Wausau itself has $500,000 in funds that it will loan at 2% for nonprofit groups to expand housing for homeless, to rehab housing for homeless. My limited information is that that's not being utilized. So there are lots of tools and money in this community that could be leveraged. And I'm glad to see that we have smart people, smarter than me, working on this. And this is just a tiny piece of public safety. It isn't a tiny piece of anything to do with the dignity and compassion that homeless people deserve and that we need to give them.
Mr. Peckham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I've really been impressed with the difficulty of this situation from the time the Public Health and Safety Committee brought it up. I voted for it at that time, and I'm going to vote for it again. After that vote, I was asked by a reporter what I was hoping was going to come of this, and I told them that I was hoping for increased safety and an increased awareness of the problem so that we can, really pitch in and resolve, as Ms. Rasmussen said, to make a real serious effort as a community to work on this. I think the spirit is there. I think Mr. Lewis over here can testify the fact that I think I saw you almost be overwhelmed with people who wanted to get in a Facebook page, wanted to donate blankets, wanted to donate comforters, come and get it, where do I drop it, blah, blah, blah. So it was really touched something off there. I do believe that, as Mr. Barnes back there told us, and the chief has also conveyed, that we have a police department that is quite humane, and they really want to work with people to find them some alternatives to stinking stairwell. I did contact and talk with Joe Volk, the executive director of the Wisconsin Coalition Against Homelessness, and he said, Pat, you need a plan. And so what I resolved to do this morning was I wasn't going to vote for this unless we also passed an amendment that would require us to do a plan. And then I found out that we are on the cusp of working on that very thing. So I think the people that the chief is working with to develop something in conjunction with the folks who've been slogging along with Pam Anderson and company for years can come up with a very good set of recommendations for us. I could say more, but the plan is happening. I think we should make sure we get behind it. And as far as the short-term kind of enlightenment we've had. It's great that there are people who can kind of facilitate that and steer that to the people who need it. So work with Catholic Charities, work with Salvation Army, do good things. Thank you.
Mr. Neal?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just very briefly, it's a kind of a small thing, but at the mayor's, the next meeting of the mayor's inclusivity committee, which is coming up in December, I've asked for an agenda item to be added to deal with the topic of homelessness, to hopefully be a regular item on the agenda, and hopefully to get maybe a representative from the coalition to attend that meeting so we can start a discussion with that group. I've really been impressed by the outpouring of passion from people. I think it is very heartening to see the concern for people, and it's a wonderful thing. I'm impressed by Mr. Craig's viewpoint when he came up and spoke, and also the young lady who works downtown and uses the ramp regularly, and I appreciate your input too, and your perspective is important. So I've had discussions with you, Chief, and some of your officers, and I do support this ordinance, knowing it is what it is. It's something to take care of an issue in a facility. It is not, as we've seen in social media, a way to raise revenue or a way to criminalize homeless people. There is none of that in this whatsoever. It's not the intention. That's not how it will work. So that being said, I will support this. I will vote for this, and thank you.
Mrs. Tall?
And can you just let us know here if this ordinance passes tonight? And I know that we've received a lot of information from your department. You've had your attorneys and yourself working on what's happening with the Ninth Circuit. If that should be in the favor, I think it was, is it Mason, right? Mason versus City of Boise. If that should stand, what happens to this ordinance 6 months and a year from now? Do we have to repeal this?
Well, I think it's
Is there any
kind of
relationship?
hard depends on how the decision is written. I mean, it all depends on how the issues are posed, how the decision comes out. It could be distinguished from our ordinance. It's really hard to analyze that in advance. It really is. And for the record, I can't take credit for any of this. I didn't work on any of it. Tara did all the research and all the work, and I believe that she did a very thorough job researching all the cases. But sort of like the Supreme Court decision on Reed versus Gilbert when it came out, made many municipality sign ordinances basically not compliant with the law anymore, so they're basically void. You could repeal it, to answer your question. You could take affirmative action to repeal it. Otherwise, it's just void, sits on the books, and is unenforceable, in my opinion.
Okay,
Does that answer your question?
It does, thank you. I just wanted that for the record, and for those who might be interested, who've been reaching out to us, talking about the Seventh Circuit and Ninth Circuit, and us pulling all the case law and all of the information. I also want to share with everyone that based on our docket that we received here, 3 cities were named, bigger metropolitan cities that do enforce this ordinance: Madison, Beloit, and Milwaukee. And I would have loved to see if this ordinance is enforced in a city that's similar to the city of Wausau. So that was surprising to me. I'm hoping that it's just not those 3 community cities in the state of Wisconsin that enforces this very same ordinance that all of you are looking to approve or not approve. I just want to share that when we talk about vulnerable employees getting to their cars back and forth from their place of employment and making sure that they're safe and that their well-being is thought of, I hope that we consider that all people have dignities, and that even homelessness and homeless people are vulnerable people in our community, and we should be looking out for them too. Elder Peckham, you talked about having conversations with Mr. Volk and others about this plan. I want to share with everyone because I want things stated out here so all of you can hear our conversations and what we experience. 6 months ago, or 9 months, I forgot when we went through our strategic plan, we talked about someone in the community creating a plan from some coalition. I don't remember because I don't have those minutes in front of me. But it's been a long time, and I hope that this fast tracks that opportunity because we've been waiting for a plan, but maybe it might be the council not making this priority. So I want the community to hear this and to know. And I hope that this holds all of us accountable, that however the vote goes down tonight, I hope that you're making this a part of your priority. I hope that whether we're budgeting for this or it's at some other committee meeting, I want to hear more about this because I haven't. And so I want to clearly state that for the record for all of you, and I want to thank everyone that came out to talk about the concerns. I feel all of you, it's a very complex discussion, and I'm going to go with what the citizens have been saying to me, reaching out to me, and I just thank you for all your time tonight.
Before we move forward with the vote, to the one gentleman back there, forgive the directness, but the time to speak would have been at the beginning. There is another chance at the end here to speak if you'd like, sir. Not a problem. I understand it's an emotional issue. The city has been committed for several years, and Mr. Peckham had addressed it, because several years ago I got Joe Volk up here from Milwaukee. We turned out in the city of Wausau to be the first city in Wisconsin, other than Milwaukee, to address this issue. And that was about 2 years or so ago. For whatever reason, some things have been put aside, but the city has been committed and will be committed as far as trying to help with this situation. The city has helped here in the last couple of years. The nonprofits can say that we have. It is unfortunate as far as, again, it's an emotional issue, and I can understand where some people are coming from. There has been misinformation put out there, which is a shame, because all of us are committed as far as trying to help folks to be compassionate, to be understanding, and to move forward with this situation. It is not an easy situation, but believe me, the city has been addressing this issue for a number of years and getting more involved than ever before. And I appreciate Chief Bliven and the department, who I think very highly of, who have been very decent and compassionate for years and continue to be. Folks, this is not something to criminalize anybody or to hurt or be punitive. There's a reason why this has to be done, and it's because of the behavior involved. The city could be held liable if somebody did get hurt. That does not mean we don't want to work with anybody to try to help others. That has got to be clearly shown. And I guess that's all I'm going to say.
All right, you may begin voting. That motion has passed 6-3.
At this time, to suspend the rules, 1D, transmission of committee business to council for the items marked pending committee action. A 2/3 vote will be required. If I can accept a motion for that, please. Motion by Mr. Neal. Do I have a second by Mr. Smith?
Begin voting. There we go. Motion passed unanimously.
File number 04-1006, a resolution of the Finance Committee approving the 2020 operating plan for Business Improvement District, bid number 1. Committee action approved 5-0. The fiscal impact will be 0. The bid plan allows businesses within the district to establish assessments to fund activities to develop, manage, and promote the district. I'll entertain a motion to accept. Motion by Mr. Gisselman, second by Ms. Rasmussen.
Begin voting. That motion has passed unanimously.
And at this time, if anybody would like to come forward to speak about a matter that was discussed tonight or anything else going on in the city, now's your chance to do it. You are welcome. Anybody like to come forward and speak? Come on up, sir. If you could, please, your name and your address, and 3 minutes.
My name is Winton Miller. I live at 2515 North 5th Street. I had the pleasure of knowing Mark Craig while I worked as a security officer in the building called Washington Square. I personally was responsible for supervising the stairwells that you were talking about in this ordinance while I worked there. I was given the authority as a security officer to ask people to remove themselves from the stairwells, which they did. I did not encounter the behaviors that the young lady gave her testimony on, and I wish that had happened so that the police officers could have come and taken care of those individuals. The purpose of this ordinance is very clear in my eyes. I saw it, I lived it, I enforced it as a security officer. I compliment you on passing it. It is only for what it is to do. But the rest of what you said, including Ms. Tao, must be done. I actually would like to stay and hear you all vote on a resolution or whatever it is called to commit yourself to additional time and energies for the homeless. I spend time on the streets. I know many of them individually, and I know that they are people just like I, and I'm a short time away from there. So again, for commending you for passing this, for I know exactly what it does, having lived it and enforced it as a security officer. We need to stand behind our police, stand together as a community, and do what's right for every single one of us. I thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And I agree with you. However, this is not on the agenda for tonight, so we will not be voting for that. But again, we are committed as far as trying to make this problem workable, at least. Would anybody else like to come forward and speak? Please do so. Your name and address, and please limit to 3 minutes if you could, please.
My name is Jennifer Scheidel. My family owned the laundromat that got burned down. And I can tell you this ordinance is not going to work. I, or somebody in my family, called the cops on somebody that was passed out, prostitutes, somebody stealing drugs or hiding drugs or selling drugs, an average of once every 3.5 days for 10 years. It was over 1,000 times myself or somebody in my family had called because of this problem. Now, you all know what happened. It wasn't solved. What's going to happen is these people are going to go to the parking ramp. They're going to pass out. They're going to do their drugs. They're going to do whatever they're going to do. The cops are going to come. The cops are going to kick them out. They're going to leave. Within a half an hour to an hour later, these people are going to come back and do the same thing. And it's going to be a vicious cycle over and over and over again. I know this for a fact because my family has been dealing with it for over 10 years. That's all I need to say.
Thank you, ma'am. And I'll open up for one more time if anybody else wants to come forward. You've already spoken tonight, sir.
Yes, I did, but you said we could speak again.
Okay, go ahead.
I'm Al Scheidel. You heard my address earlier, so we're kind of going to keep it short. I only really heard just a couple of people in this whole meeting tonight that really listened to what I think is going to solve the problem. Mr. Smith was one. He talked about the Sears building. Once again, we need to put a place for these people to stay during the day as well as at night if they don't have a place to go, a warm place. We would have known that by the end of tonight if we would have had our meeting out in the parking lot. We all would have been freezing out there 2 hours later. So that needs to happen. And it's the best way to start all of this is to get it done because it's cold tonight. You know, we need to get a place for them to go, whether it's a 20 by 20 building with heat in it, with tables and chairs. It doesn't have to be elaborate. I think the Catholic Charities does an excellent job and probably a little bit too much. Just a place to go to warm up. That's it.
Thank you, sir. And before we leave tonight, our city clerk does have an announcement.
All right,
Tony?
thank you. I wrote a quick little spiel. I'll just read it off to everybody. So tonight is my last official council meeting. I have turned in my resignation for my position. I will no longer be in full capacity with my position as of Wednesday, November 20th. I am planning to continue working with the city evenings to do as much as I can to assist and to hopefully come back and train my successor also. I know this is a busy year coming up in 2020, and there's a lot of duties and responsibilities for my position that I want to share and make it easy with the transition. I'm excited to move into my new position and to take a new step into a new phase of my life. I am very honored to work for, this is my hometown. I know you've heard this before. I was born and raised here. I raised my children here, and just as a sidebar, there's 6 of us kids. We all graduated from Wausau West. My children graduated from Wausau West, and my great niece graduated from Wausau West. So we have 3 generations that I'm very proud to say are all Warriors. Yeah, go Warriors. I'll miss everybody, and I made some extraordinary friends, and I consider all the council and the staff and everyone here to be those friends. And it's been a very fast but fulfilling 9 years that I've been working here, and I thank you all for being part of my journey. Thank you.
Mrs. Rasmussen?
Thank you. In response to Tony's announcement, I would just like to thank her for her service to the city. She has done an amazing job for us, and she has left big shoes to fill, and it's going to be difficult to replace Tony, but we certainly thank you, and we wish you all the best in your new opportunity that has come along. And so, not to make you cry, but we will
No,
miss
I'm
you.
trying not to.
We will miss you, Tony, so thank you.
Thank you very much.
And to echo what Mrs. Rasmussen had just stated, on a personal level, Tony, you are a great employee and a wonderful person, and you would truly be missed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your service to the city.
Thank you.
This time, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. Motion by Mr. Martin, second by Mr. Peckham.
Begin voting, please. Motion passed unanimously.
And at this time, we adjourn. Everybody have a great night.